Hello family, welcome to Stories with JAYVIL. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and remember to turn on the post notifications so you don't miss any future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Now sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Once upon a time, in a vibrant village nestled amidst green hills, there lived a woman named Grace Adams. Grace was known far and wide for her kind heart and quiet wisdom. Her modest home stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by blooming wildflowers and ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets of old. Though she carried herself with grace and dignity, there was a mystery about her that intrigued all who met her. Grace's story began many years ago when she was a young maiden with dreams as vast as the skies above. She was raised by her mother, Margaret, a wise herbalist who often said, "A woman's strength is not in her beauty but in her resilience." Grace took these words to heart and grew up with a fierce determination to make her mark in the world. One fateful day, a traveler named Aaron Clark arrived in the village. Aaron was a merchant, his cart brimming with treasures, brightly colored fabrics, intricate carvings, and trinkets that glittered in the sun. He was a man of charm and confidence, with a smile that could melt even the coldest of hearts. It wasn't long before Aaron's eyes fell upon Grace and he was captivated. He pursued her relentlessly, bringing her small gifts and telling her tales of his travels to far-off lands. Grace, drawn to his adventurous spirit, fell deeply in love. Within a year, they were married in a celebration that the village remembered for its joy and grandeur. The union seemed perfect, and their love story was the talk of the town. But as the years passed, the vibrant man Grace married began to change. Aaron became distant, his once warm words replaced by cold indifference. He often disappeared for days, leaving Grace to tend to their home and manage the little shop they had opened together. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was the nature of his work, but deep down, she knew something was amiss. One evening, Grace's closest friend, Sarah Williams, came to visit. They sat together under the large oak tree in Grace's yard, the setting sun casting golden light on their faces. "You've grown quieter, Grace," Sarah said, her voice filled with concern. "What troubles you?" Grace hesitated, then sighed. "It's Aaron. He's not the man I married. He's become a stranger." Sarah took her hand. "Trust your instincts, Grace. The heart never lies. Whatever you're feeling, it's valid. But remember, you are stronger than you know." As time went on, Grace discovered unsettling truths about Aaron. He had been gambling away their savings and forging her name to take loans. The betrayal cut deep, but Grace kept her pain hidden, determined to find a way to rebuild her life. One stormy night, the village was shaken by the sound of raised voices coming from Grace's home. By morning, Aaron was gone, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and shattered trust. The villagers whispered about his sudden departure, but Grace said nothing. She focused on her work, quietly piecing her life back together. Months later, a young investigator named Olivia Bennett arrived in the village. Sent by the king's court, she had heard of Aaron's disappearance and the rumors surrounding it. Olivia, known for her sharp mind and relentless pursuit of justice, was determined to uncover the truth. As she approached Grace's home, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary case. The air was thick with secrets, and Olivia knew she was about to unravel a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. And so began a journey that would test the strength of the human spirit and reveal the resilience of a woman determined to rise above her past. The morning was crisp, the kind of day when the sunlight felt softer, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Grace stood by the well, her hands busy drawing water, when she noticed a commotion near the village square. Curious, she set the bucket aside and joined the growing crowd. At the center of it stood a woman unlike any Grace had seen before. Olivia Bennett, the young investigator, exuded an air of authority that made the villagers stop and listen. She wore a fitted navy coat that hinted at her station and carried a leather satchel slung across her shoulder. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd, searching for someone, something. "Good people," Olivia began, her voice clear and steady. "I am here on behalf of the king's court to investigate matters of grave concern. I seek the truth and I ask for your cooperation." The crowd murmured amongst themselves, uneasy but intrigued. Grace lingered at the edge, her heart beating a little faster. Olivia's gaze swept across the faces until it landed on Grace. For a moment they locked eyes and Grace felt a shiver of apprehension. "You there," Olivia said, pointing towards her. "You are Grace Adams, are you not?" Grace hesitated but nodded. "Yes, I am. May we speak in private?" Olivia asked. The crowd parted as Grace stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. She led Olivia to her home, the whispers of the villagers following her. Once inside, Olivia wasted no time. She placed her satchel on the wooden table and pulled out a parchment. "I have been sent here to investigate your husband's sudden disappearance and the debts he left behind. Tell me, Mrs. Adams, what happened the night Aaron Clark vanished?" Grace sat down, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I told the villagers everything I know. He left in the middle of the night without a word. I have no idea where he went." Olivia studied her carefully. "And yet I hear whispers of raised voices, of an argument that was heard far and wide. Are you certain there is nothing more you wish to share?" Grace's jaw tightened. "I am certain." For a moment Olivia said nothing, her sharp gaze unwavering. Then she leaned back, her expression softening. "I'm not here to accuse you, Grace, but if there is anything you are withholding, now is the time to say it. I can help you, but only if you let me." Grace hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted to trust Olivia, to unburden herself of the secret she carried, but fear held her back. She managed a small nod, unwilling to say more. Olivia sighed, sensing the wall Grace had built around herself. "Very well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me." She stood and adjusted her coat. "I'll be staying at the inn. Please think about what I've said." As Olivia left, Grace sat in silence, her thoughts swirling. She glanced at the painting on the wall, one of Aaron's final works, a vibrant piece that now felt like a mockery of their once happy life. That night, as Grace lay in bed, she couldn't shake Olivia's words. Memories of Aaron's betrayals resurfaced, mingling with the faint hope that perhaps Olivia truly could help her. But trust was a fragile thing, and Grace had been burned too many times to offer it freely. Meanwhile, at the inn, Olivia pored over her notes, piecing together the fragments of Aaron's story. She knew there was more to the tale than Grace let on, and she vowed to uncover the truth. What she didn't know was that her investigation would unravel secrets far darker than she had anticipated. Secrets that would change the lives of everyone in the village forever. And as the moonlight bathed the quiet village, the wheels of destiny began to turn. The morning mist clung to the earth, shrouding the village in an ethereal veil as Olivia stepped out of the inn. Her sharp mind was busy connecting the fragmented pieces of the mystery. Aaron Clark's sudden disappearance was troubling enough, but the whispers in the village hinted at a darker truth, one steeped in betrayal and loss. Olivia's first stop was the blacksmith's workshop, a bustling hub where Aaron was known to frequent before his departure. The blacksmith, Mr. Thomas, a broad-shouldered man with soot-streaked arms, greeted her with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Investigator," he said, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. "What brings you to my forge?" Olivia wasted no time. "Mr. Thomas, I've been told Aaron Clark often spent time here. Did he share anything unusual before he vanished?" Thomas frowned, his brow furrowing as he leaned against the anvil. Aaron wasn't the type to share much. "But I'll tell you this," he was troubled. "He often spoke of debts, of pressures he couldn't bear. He even hinted at something that made my hair stand on end." "And what was that?" Olivia prompted. Thomas hesitated, glancing around as though the walls had ears. "He spoke of a deal he made, one he regretted. Said he couldn't see a way out, that it would cost him everything. I didn't press him, it wasn't my place. But if you ask me, the man was running from more than debt." Olivia thanked him, her mind racing as she walked towards the marketplace. The village was alive with the chatter of merchants and the clinking of coins. But Olivia's focus was on a figure in the distance, Sarah Miller, Grace's closest friend. She stood by a stall, inspecting a basket of apples. "Mrs. Miller," Olivia greeted, her tone friendly but probing. "Might I have a word?" Sarah smiled, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Of course, investigator. What can I do for you?" Olivia decided to test the waters. "I've been speaking to the villagers about Aaron Clark. Some have hinted that he had enemies, debts he couldn't pay. Do you know anything about this? Sarah's smile faltered. Aaron had his flaws but enemies? I can't say I know of any. Grace told me you were there for her during her darkest moments, Olivia continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. That you were the first person she called after Aaron left. That speaks of deep trust. Sarah's expression softened. Grace is like a sister to me. I couldn't bear to see her suffer. But if you're asking whether I know more about Aaron's disappearance, I don't. I wish I did. Olivia studied her, sensing the tightrope of truth and deception Sarah walked. She decided to let it go for now, offering a polite nod before heading towards Grace's home. Inside the humble cottage, Grace sat by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of a teacup. Olivia entered, her presence filling the room with quiet intensity. Grace, Olivia began, pulling out a chair. I spoke to the blacksmith and your friend Sarah. Both hinted at complications in Aaron's life. Deaths, perhaps enemies. What do you know of this? Grace hesitated, her gaze fixed on the steaming tea. Aaron kept secrets, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew he was in trouble, but he wouldn't tell me the details. All I know is that he was desperate. Olivia leaned closer. Did he ever mention a deal? Something that could explain his sudden disappearance? Grace's eyes darted to the painting on the wall, a somber landscape Aaron had painted weeks before he vanished. He said it was our way out, that it would fix everything. But it didn't, it only made things worse. Olivia followed her gaze, studying the painting. It felt like a clue, a piece of the puzzle waiting to be uncovered. But for now, she needed more. As Olivia left Grace's home, the weight of the case pressed on her shoulders. The village held its secrets tightly, but Olivia was determined to unravel them. Little did she know, the truth she sought would shake the very foundation of Grace's world and her own. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, the past began to claw its way into the present, demanding to be heard. The village night was alive with whispers, the kind that seemed to cling to the cobblestone streets and linger in the darkened alleys. Olivia's mind raced as she retraced her steps from Grace's home. Something about Sarah Miller's demeanor unsettled her. Her words were carefully chosen, her tone deliberate. Olivia suspected she knew more than she let on. Her investigation led her to the local tavern, the Silver Lantern, where villagers often gathered to exchange stories over mugs of ale. The warm glow of the lanterns and the hum of voices greeted Olivia as she entered. Heads turned briefly, some nodding in acknowledgement of her presence before resuming their conversations. At a corner table, an elderly man with a weathered face and sharp eyes caught Olivia's attention. This was Mr. Henry, the village historian, a man known for his knowledge of the past and his uncanny ability to recall details others might forget. Olivia approached him, her boots clicking softly against the wooden floor. Mr. Henry, she greeted, pulling out a chair. I was hoping you might help me. He looked up from his mug, his eyes narrowing slightly. Investigator. You've stirred quite a storm in our quiet village. What do you need? Olivia leaned closer, her voice low. I'm looking into Aaron Clark's disappearance and the events surrounding it. I have reason to believe his troubles weren't entirely his own. Do you recall anything unusual about him or his connections? Henry sipped his drink, his gaze thoughtful. Aaron was a man with big dreams but little means. He often spoke of wanting to escape this place, to make something of himself. But dreams like his come at a cost. What kind of cost? Olivia pressed. The old man set his mug down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There's a tale that's been told in this village for years about a hidden network, people who offer desperate souls a way out. But their help always comes with strings attached. I've seen men like Aaron before. They get caught up in something they can't control. Olivia's pulse quickened. And what happens to those who can't pay the price? Henry's eyes darkened. They disappear, just like Aaron. The revelation sent a chill down Olivia's spine. Could Aaron have been lured into such a web? And if so, who was behind it? She thanked Henry and left the tavern, her mind a whirlwind of questions. As Olivia walked back to her lodgings, the quiet of the village seemed to amplify every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the faint crunch of footsteps behind her. She stopped and turned, her hand instinctively reaching for the small blade she carried. The street was empty, but the unease lingered. The next morning, Olivia returned to Grace's home, determined to confront her with this new information. Grace greeted her with tired eyes, the weight of past evident in her every movement. "Grace," Olivia began, her tone firm yet kind, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did Aaron ever mention anyone who might have offered him help or made him promises?" Grace hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea. "There was a man," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He came to the house once, said he could help Aaron with his debts. Aaron didn't want to tell me much, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Do you remember his name?" Olivia asked, her heart pounding. Grace shook her head. "No, but he carried a black ledger. Aaron called him the collector." The name sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. It was clear now that Aaron's troubles ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The shadows of his past were not just whispers, they were a storm, one that threatened to consume everything in its path. As Olivia left Grace's home, a sense of urgency gripped her. The threads of the mystery were beginning to unravel, but the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. Somewhere in the village, the answers awaited her, but so did the shadows. The village awoke to a restless morning, its usual tranquility disrupted by an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air. Olivia stood at her window, the dawn light casting long shadows across her modest room. The name the collector echoed in her mind, a chilling moniker that hinted at secrets and danger. Determined to uncover more, Olivia decided to start with the town's archives. The records were housed in an old stone building at the edge of the village, a place that smelled of aged paper and ink. As she stepped inside, the creak of the wooden floorboards echoed her resolve. The archivist, a wiry man with spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, looked up with mild curiosity. "I need access to the village's historical records," Olivia stated. He raised an eyebrow. "That's a broad request. Anything specific? Anything related to unusual disappearances, unsolved deaths, or the name the collector?" The archivist's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. He hesitated but eventually nodded. "Follow me." He led Olivia to a back room filled with dusty shelves and stacks of old ledgers. He gestured to a section marked financial records. "This might be a good place to start. Be careful, some of these are fragile." Olivia sifted through the records, her fingers tracing the faded ink. Hours passed, and just as her frustration began to mount, she stumbled upon a ledger that caught her attention. The cover was black, its edges worn with age, and inside the handwriting was meticulous, almost mechanical. The entries detailed loans, debts, and names, dozens of names, some of which had lines drawn through them. One name stood out, Aaron Clark. Beside his name were the words, "Balance due, settlement pending." Olivia's breath hitched. The other names also seemed to have ominous notes beside them, defaulted, missing, settled. This wasn't just a financial record, it was a trail of despair. The archivist peeked into the room. "Found something?" "Yes," Olivia replied, closing the ledger. "Who owns this?" The man adjusted his glasses, visibly uneasy. "That ledger, it's tied to rumors. They say a man comes to those desperate enough to risk everything. No one knows who he is or where he goes, but people call him the collector. Some say he's not entirely natural." "Superstition?" Olivia asked, trying to mask her unease. He shrugged. "Perhaps, but the disappearances are real." As Olivia left the archives, she felt a growing weight of responsibility. It wasn't just about solving Aaron's disappearance anymore. It was about dismantling whatever darkness had ensnared this village. Later that evening, Olivia met with Grace again. This time, Grace was more forthcoming, her defenses weakened by Olivia's persistence. "I remembered something else," Grace said, her voice trembling. "Aaron received a letter shortly before he disappeared. It was sealed with a black wax stamp. Do you still have it?" Olivia asked urgently. Grace nodded and retrieved the letter from a wooden box. The envelope was worn, the wax seal broken, but Olivia could still make out the faint impression of a raven. Inside was a single sentence, "Your debt will be collected soon." The chilling message confirmed Olivia's suspicions. Whatever had happened to Aaron was tied to this collector, a figure who seemed to thrive on despair and desperation. That night, as Olivia prepared for bed, she noticed a shadow move outside her window. Gripping her blade, she stepped outside, her senses alert. The village was quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the cool night breeze. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Returning inside, she bolted the door and sat at her desk, studying the ledger and the letter. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture, but the more she uncovered, the closer the darkness seemed to creep. Somewhere out there, the collector was watching, and Olivia knew she had to confront him before more lives were claimed by his sinister ledger. The days in the village grew colder, the sun's light dimming under the weight of unease. Olivia, now armed with the cryptic ledger and the chilling letter, sought allies in her quest. The villagers, though wary of her inquiries, whispered of old tales passed down over generations, stories of a shadowy figure who preyed on desperation. Olivia met Grace near the market square one morning. Grace's face was pale, her eyes shadowed with worry. "I've thought about the letter, Olivia," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid for what this means for all of us." "Fear won't help us now," Olivia replied firmly. "We need answers. Someone in this village knows more than they're willing to say." Together, they approached Elder Benjamin, a man well into his 70s who was regarded as the keeper of the village's history. His home was a modest stone cottage on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by tall oak trees that whispered secrets when the wind blew through them. Elder Benjamin greeted them with a kind but tired smile. "Ah, Olivia and Grace, what brings you to my door?" Olivia placed the ledger and letter on the table in front of him. "Do you know anything about these?" The elder's face darkened as he picked up the letter, his fingers trembling. "This seal," he murmured, pointing to the faint raven imprint. "I've seen it before, a long time ago." "Where?" Olivia leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Many years ago, there was a young man, Henry Carter, who fell into debt after a failed harvest. His desperation led him to the edge of reason, and one night he claimed to have met a man in the woods who promised to clear his debts. Days later, Henry vanished. The only clue left behind was a letter bearing this seal." "What happened to him?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one knows for certain," Elder Benjamin said, "but those who knew him claimed he'd been taken by the collector, a figure from old stories. He is said to be a man, or perhaps something more sinister, who thrives on despair. Those who deal with him are rarely seen again." Olivia frowned, her resolve hardening. "These are more than just stories. Someone is using fear to manipulate and harm the vulnerable." Elder Benjamin nodded solemnly. "If that is true, Olivia, then you are walking a dangerous path." That evening, Olivia returned to her room and pored over the ledger once more. Each name carried the weight of tragedy, a reminder of the lives ruined by this mysterious entity. Her eyes fell on a name near the bottom, Grace Taylor. Her breath caught. Grace's name hadn't been there before. She rushed to Grace's house, finding her friend pacing the small living room. "Grace, has anything strange happened to you recently?" Olivia asked, holding up the ledger. Grace's face went pale as she saw her name. "I received another letter this morning," she admitted, her hands shaking as she handed it over. The message was brief. "Your time is running out." "We need to act now," Olivia said. "This collector feeds on fear and secrecy. We need to expose him." As night fell, Olivia and Grace prepared to confront the shadows that had haunted their village for so long. With the ledger in hand and courage burning in their hearts, they stepped out into the cold night, unaware of the dangers lurking in the darkness. The collector was closer than they realized, watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The village slept under a blanket of darkness, its stillness broken only by the occasional howl of the wind. Olivia and Grace ventured toward the woods, lanterns in hand. The forest, shrouded in mist, loomed like a living entity, each shadow whispering warnings of the peril ahead. Their journey began with hesitant steps, but Olivia's determination kept them moving. The ledger, clutched tightly in her hands, felt heavier with each step, as though burdened by the weight of the secrets it carried. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. Olivia glanced at the crude map Elder Benjamin had hastily drawn for them. If the stories are true, the ruins of the old mill are just ahead. That's where Henry Carter was last seen, and it might be where we find answers. As they approached the clearing, the ruins came into view, a crumbling stone structure swallowed by nature. Vines crawled over its walls, and the broken windows stared back at them like hollow eyes. The air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. "This place," Grace whispered, stopping abruptly. "It feels wrong," Olivia nodded. "That's exactly why we need to be here." Inside the mill, their lanterns cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. They found broken furniture and scattered debris, but nothing out of the ordinary, until Olivia's foot struck something metallic. She crouched to pick it up, a rusted locket, its chain broken. Opening it revealed a tiny portrait of a young man and woman, their faces faded with time. "Henry Carter," Olivia guessed aloud. Before Grace could respond, a faint sound echoed through the mill, a soft, rhythmic tapping like footsteps. They froze, their lanterns trembling in their hands. "Who's there?" Olivia called out, her voice firm despite her racing heart. No response came, only the sound of movement growing louder. Suddenly, from the shadows emerged a frail figure, a woman, her tattered clothes and haunted eyes marking her as someone who had endured unimaginable suffering. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to leave. He'll find you." Olivia stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you? What do you know about the collector?" The woman flinched at the name, shaking her head violently. "I can't. He'll punish me." Grace moved to comfort her. "We can help you, but you need to tell us what's going on." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows. "He takes from those who are desperate. Promises them everything, then takes it all. I was one of them. What did he take from you?" Olivia pressed gently. "My freedom," she whispered. "My life I escaped, but he's always watching." The woman's sudden gasp cut through the air, her gaze fixed on something behind Olivia and Grace. Turning, they saw a shadowy figure in the doorway, tall, cloaked, and motionless. "Run," the woman urged, her voice filled with terror. "Run now!" Olivia and Grace didn't hesitate. Grabbing the ledger, they bolted out of the mill, the shadow following close behind. The forest seemed alive, branches clawing at their clothes as they raced toward the village. When they finally reached the edge of the woods, they collapsed, breathless and trembling. The shadow was gone, but its presence lingered in the cold night air. "We're in deeper than we realized," Olivia said, her voice steady despite her fear. "But we are getting close to the truth." Grace nodded, her resolve hardening. "Whatever it takes, we'll end this." As they made their way back to the village, the shadow watched from the tree line, its form dissolving into the darkness. The collector was aware of their quest, and he wasn't going to let them uncover his secrets without a fight. The village seemed quieter than usual when Olivia and Grace returned, their escape from the mill still fresh in their minds. Despite the chill of the night, the air was heavy with anticipation, as though the very land held its breath for what was to come. Elder Benjamin was waiting for them by the communal fire. His face lit up with relief as he saw them approach, but his expression quickly turned grave when he noticed the fear etched in their faces. "You found something," he said, not as a question but a statement. Olivia nodded and placed the ledger on the wooden table beside the fire. "This ledger contains more than just numbers. It's a record of everything the collector has done, names, dates, even the promises he made to his victims." Benjamin's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. "This is what we need to expose him. But it's also dangerous. If he knows you have this..." "He already knows," Grace interrupted. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "We saw him in the mill. He followed us." The elder sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Then we must act quickly. The villagers need to know the truth." The next morning, the villagers gathered in the square, drawn by the elder's summons. Olivia stood beside him, clutching the ledger. Grace stayed close, scanning the crowd for any sign of the collector or his followers. Benjamin raised his voice to address the people. "For years we have lived in fear of a shadow, a figure who preys on the desperate and the broken. We called him the collector, but he is no more than a man who uses our pain to his advantage." Murmurs spread through the crowd, a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Olivia stepped forward, holding up the ledger. "This book is proof of his deeds," she said, her voice strong. "He has taken from all of you, your savings, your homes, even your loved ones under the guise of helping, but it was all a lie." One by one, villagers began to share their stories. A woman spoke of losing her farmland. A man recounted how his brother vanished after taking a loan from the collector. Each tale added weight to the truth. The murmurs turned to anger, then to a roar of collective outrage. But before the crowd could act, a voice cut through the chaos, a calm, chilling voice that silenced them instantly. "You speak with such conviction," the collector said, stepping into the square. His dark cloak billowed in the wind and his eyes glinted with amusement. "But have you considered what you'll do without me?" The villagers fell silent, their anger replaced with uncertainty. Olivia clenched her fists, stepping forward to confront him. "We'll rebuild," she declared. "Together we'll undo the damage you've caused." The collector laughed, a sound that sent shivers through the crowd. "You think you can defeat me with words? This village thrives on desperation, and as long as desperation exists, so will I." Before Olivia could respond, the collector raised his hand. His followers emerged from the shadows, their faces blank but their presence menacing. The square erupted into chaos as the villagers tried to flee. Olivia and Grace stood their ground, protecting the ledger at all costs. Benjamin joined them, his voice rising above the commotion. "Stand together," he urged the villagers. "Do not let fear divide us." The collector's smug expression faltered as the villagers rallied, their unity stronger than his intimidation. For the first time, Olivia saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Your reign is over," she said, her voice steady. "This village is taking back its power." The collector sneered but said nothing. With a final glance at the defiant villagers, he and his followers melted into the shadows, leaving the square silent once more. Olivia clutched the ledger tightly, her heart pounding. The battle was far from over, but for the first time she felt hope. The collector had been weakened, and the village had found its voice. Now it was up to them to ensure he never returned. The village square was a mess of overturned carts and scattered belongings, but the spirit of the villagers was anything but broken. Olivia, Grace, and Elder Benjamin convened with the community leaders to strategize their next steps. Despite their small victory in driving the collector away, they all knew it was temporary. He would return stronger and angrier. "We cannot afford to wait for him to strike again," Benjamin began, his voice heavy with determination. "We have to act now while we still have the momentum." Olivia placed the ledger on the table. "This is our weapon. If we can take it to the authorities in the capital, they'll have no choice but to investigate. With the evidence here, we can dismantle his network for good." Grace's eyes flickered with hesitation. "But that means traveling through the forest where his men still lurk." "The collector won't let us get to the capital without a fight. Then we prepare for one," Olivia said firmly. She looked around at the villagers. "This is bigger than any one of us. If we succeed, we free not just ourselves but every community he's preyed upon." The villagers nodded, their resolve solidifying. Volunteers stepped forward, armed with farming tools, makeshift weapons, and unshakable determination. They would escort Olivia and Grace to the capital, no matter the risk. The journey began at dawn. The group moved cautiously through the dense forest, the ledger tucked securely in Olivia's satchel. Birds chirped in the canopy above, but the atmosphere remained tense. Every rustling leaf felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Hours passed without incident, but as the sun began to set, shadows crept longer and an eerie silence fell over the group. It was Grace who first spotted them, figures moving between the trees, their shapes barely discernible in the fading light. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could react, the collector's men emerged, blocking the path. Their leader, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "You think you can take what's ours and walk away?" he sneered. Olivia stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "It's not yours. It never was. We're taking it back for everyone you've exploited." The man laughed, a guttural sound that sent chills through the group. Brave words. Let's see if you can back them up. The battle that followed was chaotic and fierce. The villagers fought valiantly, their makeshift weapons clashing against the collector's more organized force. Olivia and Grace stayed at the center of the group, determined to protect the ledger at all costs. Amidst the chaos, Olivia spotted a chance to escape. She grabbed Grace's hand and darted through a gap in the trees, the ledger clutched tightly to her chest. Behind them, the sounds of battle faded as they ran deeper into the forest. Eventually, they stumbled into a clearing, breathless and exhausted. A small stream trickled nearby and Olivia knelt to catch her breath. "We can't stop," Grace urged. "They'll find us." Before Olivia could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the collector himself, his dark cloak blending seamlessly with the night. "You've caused quite the inconvenience," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "But it ends here." Olivia stood, her knees trembling but her resolve unshaken. "You'll never win. The truth is out, and the people won't stop until you're brought down." The collector's eyes narrowed. "Then let's see how far your truth gets you without you to tell it." He lunged forward, but before he could reach them, a deafening roar filled the clearing. The villagers burst through the trees, their numbers overwhelming. The collector hesitated, realizing he was outnumbered. "Run while you still can," Benjamin called, his voice firm. For the first time, the collector faltered. With a snarl, he turned and disappeared into the forest, his men following close behind. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of their victory sinking in. Olivia clutched the ledger tightly, tears streaming down her face. The battle was over, but the war was not yet won. "We keep going," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The capital is waiting." And with that, they pressed on, their spirits unbroken and their goal in sight. The sun rose over the sprawling capital city, its golden rays illuminating the grand stone buildings and bustling streets. Olivia, Grace, Elder Benjamin, and the remaining villagers stood at the gates, their exhaustion evident but overshadowed by a newfound determination. They had made it. The journey had been perilous, but their resolve had carried them through. Clutching the ledger like a sacred relic, Olivia led the group into the heart of the city, their destination clear, the Hall of Justice, where the Council of Magistrates presided. Inside the Hall of Justice, the group was met with skepticism. The magistrates, a group of stern-faced individuals draped in flowing robes, listened in silence as Olivia recounted the events. Grace and Elder Benjamin stood by her side, lending their voices to the tale. "This ledger," Olivia said, holding it up, "contains every detail of the collector's schemes. Names, dates, locations, all of it. We've risked everything to bring this to you. Now it's your turn to act." One magistrate, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "These are serious accusations. If what you say is true, this would expose corruption on a massive scale. But how do we know this isn't fabricated?" Olivia's heart sank. After everything they had endured, the thought of being dismissed was unbearable. But before she could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the chamber. "She speaks the truth." The group turned to see a young clerk stepping forward. He held a document in his hands, an official record that corroborated one of the entries in the ledger. "I've seen evidence of these transactions in our archives. The numbers match." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The magistrates exchanged glances, their skepticism giving way to concern. The older woman nodded, her expression softening. "We will launch an investigation immediately," she declared. "Guards secure the ledger, and as for the collector, we will issue an arrest warrant at once." The news spread like wildfire. By the time the group stepped outside, the streets were alive with whispers of the scandal. Villagers from far and wide began to gather, their hope reignited by the promise of justice. Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that they had truly made a difference. As the group walked through the city, strangers stopped to thank them. A woman pressed a loaf of bread into Grace's hands, tears streaming down her face. "For my family," she said, "for what you've done." Elder Benjamin placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "You've given them hope," he said. "That is a power greater than any ledger." Days later, news arrived that the collector had been apprehended. His network of corruption unraveled quickly, and those who had suffered under his schemes began to reclaim their lives. The Council of Magistrates, now under intense scrutiny, pledged to reform the system to prevent such exploitation in the future. Olivia and Grace returned to the village as heroes. The community, once fractured by fear, was now united in celebration. They rebuilt what had been lost, their bonds stronger than ever. Under the shade of the great baobab tree, Olivia looked out at the gathering. Children played, elders shared stories, and laughter filled the air. Grace sat beside her, a rare smile on her face. "We did it," Grace said softly. Olivia nodded. "No, we did it together." As the sun set, casting the village in a warm golden glow, Olivia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. They had fought for justice, not just for themselves, but for all those who had suffered. And in doing so, they had reclaimed more than just their freedom, they had reclaimed their hope. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.